Tywin Lannister in House of the Dragon shares intriguing parallels with Game of Thrones Lannisters. Lohar mistakenly calling Tywin is a clever nod to the iconic Game of Thrones villain. Though the Lannisters play a smaller role in HOTG, Tywin Lannister remains a fearsome and compelling TV villain. In a not-so-subtle reference to one of Game of Thrones' most iconic characters, House of the Dragon Season 2 finale includes a nod to the original show's villain Tywin Lannister. Since House Lannister only has two representatives in House of the Dragon, the twins Jason and Tywin Lannister, Jefferson Hall, the family's presence in the prequel is far less dominant than in Game of Thrones. However, House of the Dragon still maintains House Lannister's penchant for arguably villainous and anti-hero family members. In House of the Dragon Season 2 finale, Tywin Lannister gets his biggest episode focus yet as he travels to convince the Triarchy to ally with Team Green. In order to gain their fleets, Tywin must win the loyalty of Triarchy Captain Sharako Lohar, who tries testing Tywin in feats of strength while continuing to call him the wrong name. While most of the names that Lohar calls him are completely made up, one mistaken moniker is Tywin, the name of the patriarch of House Lannister during Game of Thrones, and one of the franchise's most compelling characters. Lohar calls Tywin Lannister Tywin over 100 years before the Game of Thrones villain is born. When the Triarchy Admiral Sharako Lohar meets Tywin Lannister in House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 8, she incorrectly refers to him as Tywin, Tyrod, and Tymon until he finally proves himself to her. While there are no known Tyrods or Tymons in House Lannister's family tree, there is one Tywin Lannister, whose story commences over 100 years after House of the Dragon's timeline. Considering Game of Thrones' character is the only known Tywin Lannister in the franchise's history, it's possible that Lohar gave the family the inspiration for his name. Though the Lannisters play a less prominent role in House of the Dragon, the roles of Tywin and his children in Game of Thrones still find parallels in the prequel through comparisons to House Hightower. Otto Hightower bears similarities to Tywin. Alicent Hightower's story draws comparisons to Cersei. Wayne Hightower is a knight in the vein of Jaime, and Aegon Io Targaryen is somewhat similar to Cersei and Jaime's son Joffrey. Meanwhile, both Tywin and Jason Lannister are very different from Game of Thrones family members, as their power in the realm massively shifts with Tywin's rise. Game of Thrones' Tywin Lannister is still one of the greatest villains in TV history. House Lannister has no shortage of incredible villains, with Cersei and Joffrey often standing out as some of the worst villains in TV history. Even Jaime Lannister begins Game of Thrones Season 1 as Ned Stark's biggest adversary and villainous foe. It isn't until he begins his trek with Brienne of Tarth that Jaime develops from an antagonist to a compelling anti-hero. Cersei remains villainous until her death toward Game of Thrones ending, but she's still given some redeeming traits in her love for her children and tragic dynamic in her family as Tywin's only daughter. Meanwhile, Tyrion is Game of Thrones' only major Lannister who remains a heroic, sympathetic figure from his debut until his final moments on screen. With Tyrion being one of Game of Thrones' most important heroic protagonists throughout the series alongside Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, and the surviving Stark siblings, the love for his character makes Tywin Lannister's position as a fearsome antagonist more pronounced. Though the other lion-crested Lannisters develop varying levels of villainy and heroism throughout the show, Tywin's status never changes ahead of his Season 4 death. Tywin is clearly set up as a character we should hate. He's cruel and emotionally abusive to Tyrion, ruthless to any foe who stands in the way of his family's power, lacks any affection or respect for Cersei despite the fact that she proves herself as his most worthy successor, and organizes the deaths of Robb and Catelyn Stark in the Red Wedding. Tywin is far from a good man and has few admirable traits, as his entire motivation in life is to enhance the status and power of House Lannister, whatever the cost. Regardless, it's hard not to be captivated by Tywin anytime he appears on screen. Unlike when Cersei or Joffrey appear and begin scheming, Tywin's on-screen appearances don't give me an internal reaction of anxiety and loathing for his character. Tywin is a level-headed strategist who makes ruthless decisions, but he's incredibly smart, calculated, and consistent in a way that no other Game of Thrones villains are. Littlefinger strives to be like Tywin, but he can't compare to the tact and cleverness of House Lannister's patriarch. Though Tywin has no redeemable qualities, I can't help but thoroughly enjoy his character and any scene featuring him. Tywin and Arya Stark's Game of Thrones Season 2 dynamic at Harrenhal is still one of my favorite storylines from the entire series. I still find it interesting upon rewatching that as anxiety-ridden and surprising as their scenes together are, they don't make him any worse of a villain or better of a person. When Tyrion Lannister kills Tywin in one of the show's most important moments, I was more sad that it meant his story and screen time were over, despite his fate being deserved. In my eyes, Tywin Lannister remains one of the best-written characters in TV history, with stiff competition from author George R.R. Martin's slew of other compelling protagonists and antagonists. How Tyland is related to Game of Thrones' Tywin Lannister. Although Lohar cheekily refers to him as Tywin in a nod to Game of Thrones character, Tyland actually isn't a direct ancestor of Tywin Lannister. While Shiraka Lohar informs Tyland that she wants him to impregnate her wives so she can have children by him, there's no indication in George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood book that Tyland has kids. Rather, House Lannister's bloodline is carried on by Tyland's twin brother Jason. Jason's son Lorien inherits Casterly Rock after his father's death in the Dance of the Dragons, with their family tree then continuing through his descendants. The Lannister family tree isn't as fully fleshed out as House Stark or House Targaryen's family tree in the Game of Thrones universe. It's not entirely clear exactly how many generations there are between Tyland and Tywin, as the lineage gets a bit muddled between Jason's son Lorien and Tywin's great-great-grandfather Daemon Lannister. However, the timeline makes it seem likely that there are only about 2 generations between Lorien and Daemon, suggesting Tyland is the great-great-great-great-great-great-uncle of Tywin Lannister. Tyland's AOTD story shares some intriguing similarities to Game of Thrones Lannisters. Tyland may not be a direct ancestor of Tywin Lannister and his children, but his story does have some overlap with the Game of Thrones characters. For instance, both Tyland and Tywin become Hand of the King after the ruler they originally served under dies. Tyland becomes Hand of the King to Aegon III Targaryen after Aegon I is killed, whereas Tywin Lannister is Hand of the King to Aerys II Targaryen before later acting in the same position for Joffrey Baratheon. While House of the Dragon's timeline will likely end before reaching this part in Fire and Blood, Tyland also embarks on an anti-hero arc that loosely reflects Jaime Lannister's development in Game of Thrones. Tyland goes from a usurper under Team Green and someone who advocates for the death of a young boy to said boy's hand and friend when he ascends the Iron Throne as King Aegon II Targaryen. Similarly, Jaime began Game of Thrones by trying to kill young Bran Stark before amending his ways and facing his betrayals in Season 8. Tyland's future in House of the Dragon will also bear a tragic similarity to Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. After Rhaenyra takes King's Landing, Team Black has Tyland tortured for information about the crown's gold, which leads to the former Master of Coin being blinded, mutilated, and permanently scared on his face. Tyland's appearance thereafter is cruelly referred to as evil and monstrous, not unlike the horrible insults that are thrown at Tyrion in Game of Thrones. Sadly, it isn't until after House of the Dragon's War that much of Tyland's story takes form. Taking place about 172 years before the events of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon tells the tale of the rise of the Targaryens, the only family of dragon lords to survive the doom of Valyria. The popular HBO spin-off show first starred Millie Alcock and Emily Carey as Rhaenyra Targaryen and Alicent Hightower before they were replaced by Emma Darcy and Olivia Coke, who play the older versions of the characters. Also starring in the series is Matt Smith, Prince Daemon Targaryen, and Paddy Considine as Rhaenyra's father, King Viserys Targaryen.